Microphones on the table are very sensitive. So please keep any little side chatter to the minimum because it will get picked up and will be broadcast everywhere. So we have reached the bewitching hour, so we'll call this meeting of the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. The clerk's office has seen to it that the proper posting of this meeting's agenda and meeting time and location have been made per the requirements. Everyone is here. Supervisors McCulick, Spalek, Berg, Galatz are present, and Mr. Strump, as is Mr. Schleif. So with that, gentlemen, we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to our guests this morning. Let's get right into the agenda. We have the consent agenda, which were the minutes from the September 15th, 2022 meeting. I'll entertain a motion and a second to approve that. Mr. McCulick, Mr. Galatz. Moving on to the discussion items. We'll start out with the Fair Park quarterly report. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, very good. I'm sorry. Now we'll move on to the Fair Park, the quarterly report.
Am I on, Gina?
Yeah, you gotta give
Good
her a
morning.
second.
So the Fair Park quarterly report is actually my EOS update from the county. So I'm going to just very quickly touch on that. And then Kelly Boone, the executive director for AIS, is here today for the annual report. So in the report, in the quarterly update, you'll see there's the 3 initiatives. One about the written strategy to support Eagles Entertainment Group. So we did meet on site with them on September 30th to discuss kind of site plan layouts. AIS was present for that meeting. And we're currently waiting to confirm and hear back what the site plans are out there for this 2023. So we are still working towards that, and we're hoping to have a better update in the next, 30 to 60 days with regards to the activity that will be out there this spring or next summer, May 1 to September 1. The second initiative you see there is the business plan for the Agricultural Industrial Society, which is on track. Unfortunately, we were going to get more of an update on that today, but we will likely be rescheduling that because the board director is out sick today. But that is moving along, and there is a new mission and vision for AIS, and AIS is currently the AIS Strategic Plan Committee is currently working through initiatives and objectives for that plan. So that it needs to, in my opinion, that is kind of a checkpoint with this committee that we're hoping to have, but we'll likely be pushing that to a future meeting. And then the last one is kind of this concept around developing the strategy to support the agriculture industrial society. And that is a plan, but that's really the physical facility, human resources support that we think is going to be needed as they move forward or after seeing the outcomes of that business plan. So it's a little bit later. It is taking both of these items are taking a little bit longer just because the scheduling is difficult, and then the meetings are producing a lot of really good discussion and dialogue. And so in doing that, it's a lot of, okay, well, we're going to need to meet again. Okay, well, so it's moving a little bit slower, but the committee is meeting regularly. And I'm really happy with how that's going. So does anybody have any questions for me before Kelly gives her annual update?
Do we anticipate we'll have some resolution on these before the end of this year?
No. I mean, we anticipate that we will reschedule that with Phil and or make sure this group gets a copy of the new mission and vision. We can even send that out following this meeting. So you have time to take a look at that and then potentially even preview, some of the initial discussion around the initiatives and the objectives and potentially the direction. but we're gonna be close. We're gonna be close. If it's not December, it's gonna be, I would say, January or February. I just don't want to make a commitment to the end of December that we won't be able to keep.
Any questions from any of the committee members? Thank you. Moving on with the Fair Park Annual Report, Ms. Boone, please, you're up.
All right, well, good morning. I did send over a PDF. Did everyone get a chance to take a look at that? Along with, okay, so that's kind of just the bird's eye view of everything that's been going on this year. So just to add a few comments to it. We have entirely changed our staff since last year. Things are going amazingly well on that end. I just got a great compliment from Jamie from a few of the people that were there last night that they really enjoyed their experience with our facilities manager and our event coordinator. Fair Park has undergone, there's a different level of pride in what they're doing now. The grounds look amazing compared to a year and a half, 2 years ago. They're really taking projects under their belt and, you know, amping up what they're doing. I think the relationship with the county and county facilities is going very well. Our event schedule at the grounds is fully back on track. We're looking at some really exciting new events, hopefully next year, that are coming. Some groups that we've been talking to that are looking at coming to the facility. Back in, I want to say it was 2015 or 16, we had Mother Earth News there, which was a rather large event that took up the entire grounds. They are looking at coming back next September, so that's exciting to hopefully happen. The fair was amazing. We could not have asked for better weather. It was perfect every single day. Our attendance was up about 500 over last year. So overall, great. And those are really kind of the highlights. Does anyone have any questions about stuff going on out there?
Questions of the committee? One thing, Kelly,
Mhm.
and maybe it's here, I just didn't see it. Do we have any comparatives on attendance, the fair entries, premiums, paid out, and so on, going back to pre-COVID, say 2019 or 2018?
I mean, I'd be happy to put that together and send it over for you, but they're definitely down.
I'm
So
just curious, but are we
Yeah.
working our way back up? Have we seen that gain coming back to what we had before?
no, and that's a statewide issue. So it's a statewide issue with every fair. We actually just hosted the District 4 meeting of the Wisconsin Association of Fairs yesterday. And this was one of the things that we talked about, and every fair is going through the same thing. During 2020, 4-H groups weren't allowed to meet. At least one group has disbanded this year, the Richfield Rebels. And you're just seeing the participation kind of going down. So fairs in general are actually going to start making a different approach to entries and fair entries, because the general consensus or the general opinion is a lot of people seem to think that you have to be in 4-H in order to enter the fair. And you don't. You know, you can be a part of any youth organization. And so unfortunately, like all the fairs have spent so long marketing it, not necessarily on purpose, that, you know, 4-H has always kind of been the poster child for fairs. And 4-H is great and FFA is great. But what we need to do is kind of turn on our heel and start promoting the fact that any person can enter the fair. So I think one approach we're going to take next year is something some other fairs have done, and start talking to the schools about having kids kind of, you know, these are the things that you could do. Look, you know, you could enter this into the fair, stuff like that, and kind of try and get those entries up that way as well. And then hopefully things with 4-H will continue to improve, and they'll start getting more kids as well, which would help on that end. So.
Going to age myself for a bit. Mr. Schlapp, I'm sure will make some comments about that. Years ago, you had at fair entries, you had open categories where adults could also enter projects. Is that still available? to
Oh yeah,
people?
we have a
You
lot of
mentioned
those.
Youth, I didn't know if it's still open to adults.
Yeah, it's still open to adults as well. So like an idea that I really liked that came up yesterday was taking a look at categories or departments that you have that seem to be declining, and then going out into the community and offering a class that teaches that. Their example was knitting and crocheting. So like if somebody out in the community, like at the library or even at Fair Park, taught a class on knitting and crocheting, teaching people how to do that, And then in turn, encouraging them to enter those things into the fair. So, but it goes both. So open, junior, senior, we have all three of those.
Still incredible pressure to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make a general observation. Kelly, you know that my company, the work concession supply company, I work with a lot of the vendors that work fairs. I personally probably get out to about 30 county fairs during the course of, of a summer. And I can just tell you, my customers say how great it is to work with you. They do say that. And you're one of the, and actually Washington County Fair is one of the better in the top 2 or 3 fairs as far as sales volume. And for all, a lot of these folks who, as you know, travel a long way from Florida and, Mississippi and places like that to run their business. I just know that the Washington County Fair is very accommodating. You guys have been great and everybody enjoys working with you. So I want you to know that I've gotten that feedback from just probably a half a dozen of my customers who say how much they enjoy, Washington County Fair. So, nice job. And they appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Alex.
So I think a question was asked earlier about the actual county fair attendance, but looking at the rental event highlights and I know that was decimated during the COVID, but how is that picking up?
We're back on a full schedule at this point. We haven't had a weekend without an event probably all year. This time of year is actually really busy for us. December is traditionally slower, so it will slow down then. And then going into the first quarter of next year, it's just gangbusters. We're busy every week, every weekend, and it won't slow down until we black it out for July for fair. So it's good.
Looking at your Fair Park team, are you back to full staffing now?
We are, yes. So there are 7 full-time employees now. So
Any other questions? Thank you.
okay, thank you guys.
Report on parks. Ms. Ludovic?
Were there any questions on the quarterly parks or golf report? I see, they're coming to an end and they're going to be revamped here following the first of the year. But we're going to talk about one of the major items later on the agenda. So does anyone have any additional questions on those items?
Off track.
Mhm.
Expand on that.
I did put a comment in there about where those rentals were at. I don't have it open, so I know it's about 50% of what we budgeted in terms of the cabin rentals. And what that is if you remember the tiny cabins, those were the 5 new cabins. So the existing 4 have kind of an established clientele and are getting return renters and meeting kind of our projected 80% capacity as well as our targets for revenues. The new cabins are smaller. They've been slower to materialize in terms of rental rates than we had originally projected. I don't know. We don't know if some of that is due to kind of a high in that type of activity with COVID and then, a backing down or, oversaturation or a difference in what people are looking for. But we have put together a full strategy around marketing those as well as a little bit more of a focus on Boy Scout groups and Girl Scout groups and trying to get people into those cabins initially so that they know they exist. They're also farther from the lake. So we have been monitoring that and we are mitigating for that with regards to how much of a budgeted revenue loss that is overall. The current year is looking really, really strong. So we aren't concerned about the revenue loss on that in the current year, but we're making adjustments to next year because we just aren't sure those projections are going to be realized.
And then on the last page, the staffing plan development shows it's past its due date, but it's not started.
Yeah, so and that one might come the 2050 plan will shed a little bit of light on that, I think, because when we originally started the 2050 plan, we had talked about a staffing component of that. And how are we going to integrate making sure we have the staffing needs met as we develop this? As we got further and further into that over the course of the last year and a half, I think we did a couple things. We hired another person, and we've made some changes with our part-time staff, and with our parks and trails manager becoming more comfortable. I think he was very uncertain about the level of staffing and the management of things. But as he's been here, he's done a really, really phenomenal job. And I think we ended up not basically settling on, I don't think we're going to add any more staff. I mean, that was really are we adding staff to this budget? And we may, if we have revenues that support that in our growth strategy, but it's not a target, right? It's not, we're going to need another $100,000 because we're going to hire another full-time person. We're working kind of the opposite direction in our revenue strategies to grow revenue. And then, as that materializes and shapes, we may look to add staff. So as an example, we've talked about the concept of if the aggregate mining at Heritage Trails materializes, we are going to strain our existing staff, right? So one of our recommendations may need to be that we add a person for that project management component on the county side. So I think you're going to see us more thoughtfully as we look at initiatives, closing down to, well, we can't do, we're up against a wall. So can we contract that out, or how are we going to be able to accomplish that? Because there was a thought on a lot of these projects that we just don't have the manpower. So anyway, we didn't do it, but I don't think we're going to do it. Right. Yep.
There's one more, up a little bit. It's Parks and Trails Manager. Says snow removal operations plan. And then that one says it's due by the end of the month, but it hasn't been started.
Yeah, that's an error. And that one's on track. The new snow operations plan will actually be presented to the department head group at their early November meeting. And it's related to communications, which staff is being mobilized. A lot of that work, it's operational in nature, but a lot of that relates to my prior comment about manpower and needing more quickly. And so for that planning, it actually utilizes facility staff, sometimes golf course staff, sometimes other land use staff, potentially, depending on the size and scope of a snow event that we have. A lot of that is coordination and communication amongst different leadership in terms of how we're pulling in those resources in those types of events. So that is moving forward. I think the communication is going to be stronger this year. And I'm looking forward to that. It's the second season of our new Parks and Trails manager. And so I think there was a lot of learning that happened last year.
If you allow me, I did want to go back to the previous comment about the cabins. So one is a kind of observation, and then another is kind of a policy piece. So applicable question. From an observation, I've had a few people go out to Airbnb and they can't find it. So something's not working in the search. My wife and I both did it, and that's disappointing because if people can't find that on Airbnb, do they even know it exists? To your point, if you got returning users, that's great. But if you're trying to track new ones and they can't find it, okay. So to a policy piece, going back to some questions I raised about sustainability of adding that value. And then if we look at other 2050 fiscal thriving plan, which I'll delay comments for there, but how sustainable is the occupancy rate going forward to meet income funding levels and projected expense maintenance fees and so on. So, that's something I think we need to revisit.
more about that 2050 plan and how those decisions are being made. And there is a reference into the plan. I don't know if you caught it around really taking a look at those things as capital comes up, and the one that's actually on the horizon where this is a real issue is the Sandy Knoll vacation rental by owner house. And you'll be able to see how the costs, how that kind of plays out. But so for now, it's fine. You know, it's a revenue stream that we have, but when we get to a certain point, right, those decisions become policy issues. And I think we are going to be in a better, and I'll kind of show you that, but I mean, that's a really good point of, you know, how those look. And
Any other questions regarding parks? Thing on the golf course? Mr. Schleich.
I'm just curious, it was a pretty good weather summer again. How did our rounds on the golf course compare, or don't we have those numbers compiled yet?
We have those numbers compiled. We have a real-time tracking tool that shows us exactly where we're at year to date. I can send you, we will send you a written recap of the season at the end of October. And it continues to shock me. They continue to outpace, I mean, they outpaced the last year. Yes, and they are strong, very strong.
I know it can be difficult scheduling a team.
Yes. I'm reminded continually that they don't need to do any more marketing because they can't handle any more customers.
The follow-up question to Chairman Schleif, is that increase attributed to the flexibility in, I think that they offered 3 and 6 holes versus your traditional 9 and 18?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd
be curious.
And at the next quarterly report, I will have the golf course here. I'm going to try to do that at least once a year. It's just a tough, you know, again, the seasonality of it is they're the same people opening the course in the morning this time of year because their seasonals are all gone. So, but yeah, Craig would know the answer to that. I'm sure it's a combination of all of that. They are doing a lot of new different things, but also just have a really strong reputation.
Other comments or questions? In terms of discussion items, we really don't take a vote, but do we get a general consensus that the reports are acceptable? Moving on to the action items, wildlife damage budget for 2023. Need a motion to approve the proposed budget. Motion in the second, and we can have discussion. Mr. Gallantz, Mr. Pospalik, Mr. Sebo, it's all yours, sir.
Well, actually, I'm going to hand this over to Mike Berg. You probably recognize him by now, hopefully. He does and manages our wildlife damage program through the animal and plant inspection, plant health inspection services. So.
I guess the first item to discuss is the budget for 2023. And the number actually, there's 2 sides to it. One is the federal side, is how USDA needs it broken down. The other one's the DNR side. It's actually a DNR program, but we're subbed out to handle a program. So both of them look pretty similar. The number we're actually approving is $26,775.09. And then there's a federal cost share of $3,123.16 for a total of $29,898.25. County administration is also in there. So you guys get paid to listen to me talk and run everything through you. That's $1,250, but you guys do have to actually claim that, so it doesn't come automatically. So just keep that in mind if something you're interested in. One other thing this year, deer donation processing. It's kind of tied in. It's a separate line on the agenda, I believe, but Gearing's was always in. They actually backed out this year. There isn't any active deer processors in Washington County for this year. So that's why there's a 0 on that line. We will still sign and go forward with the deer donation agreement if you guys would like to. Just if anybody changes their mind or decides to get in, it's good to have that signed and ready to go. But yeah.
So question I would have is.
Yep.
We'll get into that in the deer donation piece once we get there. So.
Sure.
Hold my question for that.
Questions?
We're gonna talk about the deer donation piece later.
Yeah, we can talk about it after the budget or whenever you guys would like, I guess.
The price proposed, we could discuss that.
On the crop prices,
Yeah.
we'll do that after the deer donation stuff.
Okay.
All right, no further questions on the wildlife damage budget. We have a motion and a second. Motion, vote please to approve. Favor say aye. Opposed? All right, that is approved. Now let's go on to the wildlife damage crop prices. Motion and second, bring it to discussion, please. Mr. Byrd. Mr. McCool. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so then our crop price proposal, this is year-long averages. You guys are free to move these anywhere you want. These prices came from 2 online sources, which are statewide, and then 1 local co-op. So like I say, you can look at those prices, and if you guys want to move them up or down, that's totally up to you. It's just a starting point, basically. I did present in Sheboygan County and they didn't move them, but that doesn't mean you guys can't. You definitely can, so.
But this is based on yearly average.
Year-long average, yep, from basically from September of last year to September of this year is when I got the prices for, so.
Currently, the soybeans are quite a bit lower.
Yeah,
Quite a bit than that price now.
yep,
So that's the price you pay the people on is the average.
that's the price we pay on the damage that they receive from,
Right.
yep,
Okay.
Less a deduction of.
$500, yep, $500 deduction on that, yep.
Yeah, this looks fair.
How much questions?
Just administrative piece, Dodge County.
Oh, yeah, I don't know how, when I sent it out, I was gonna mention that too. When I sent it out, somehow I sent the wrong version over, but it is corrected on the one that we're gonna sign, so.
So maybe back to Mr. Struck, I know you, in the years past, you've opined on the bushel prices, so that's all in line. And that-
Yeah, soybeans are down to like upper 12s, 12.50 in that range. That's usually just because it's harvest time. The prices are generally lower. But yeah, they're right about there.
These would be fair as a rolling average.
Yes, yes, annual average, okay, annual average, right. Because earlier in the summer, they were 15s, you know. And you could have booked it ahead of time. Prices. if you wanted to.
Well, it's like buying commodity.
Yeah, right, it is. And they look high, but all the input costs are even higher, you know, it's just crazy.
Mr. Slide.
I'd just like to thank Mr. Struck for his continuing support on this. We lean on you because we don't know the prices generally. So helps us find them if you ask. Thanks for helping.
I agree. It's nice to have a farmer on just so that they can kind of look it over and agree or move them as they want to. So,
Yeah, it's surprising. More people don't apply for damage than the amount of deer that. are-
Yeah.
It's
I think there's
incredible.
so many people that are out there chasing that big buck, that they don't want to allow the public hunting, and that's a big part of it. So,
Especially down the Holy Hill area.
yeah, and
Big private land and they only shoot the big ones and those are just
some of those guys are
so high.
leasing land out now too. And in some cases, they can get more for leasing land out for hunting than they can for what they're going to get in crop damage. So,
If we could please the committee, if Mike could explain just an abatement project we just got done, and we're processing payment for is a fence.
Yep.
Some of you might even know the owner.
So is John Erdman, TerraTech Landscaping. He's got 25.5 acres. We just recently finished the fence last week, actually. Straight line fence came in and did it. It was a $26,600 project. It's a cost share project, so it's 3/4 DNR pays for it, funded, and 25% of it is paid for by TerraTech Landscaping. So the county DNR portion came to $19,950. So that was just completed last week. So typically, when we get a permanent fence project like this, we need 3 years of documented damage to say that it's going to work out. John Erdman was a little bit different. He had his property was, he had Benner fencing, which is temporary, like a plastic mesh fencing, 6 foot tall, that he had used for as long as I've been here, over 10 years. He actually was using it when Rich Christian was here yet. And finally he said, the Benner fence, I'm still getting a lot of damage. I'm not interested in the compensation, but I'd like to pursue a permanent fence. So then I contacted the DNR, Brad Cooley, and discussed it with him, and actually went out there and assessed damages for that year. And if he would have wanted to pursue it, it was over $11,000 in damage just for that 1 year. So when I discussed that with Brad, he said, yeah, it's kind of a no brainer. If we end up paying this 10,000 out over 3 years, it's going to cost us more than what the fence is going to cost. So we can move forward with it. And
Yeah, like permits.
he did have permits when he had the Benner fence. Now that he's got the permanent fence up, he won't get permits anymore.
Oh, okay.
So, yep. Yep.
I think you answered my question, but because of that mitigation efforts with the fence, is he still able to collect the damage?
He didn't pursue that,
No, he
that
didn't,
claim.
but could he?
Yeah, he could have, up to this point. Well, now if, he gets a deer in there or something, and he's keeping the fence up, he would still be eligible. But if, he doesn't keep the fence up or the gates are open or something like that, then, he wouldn't get compensated for that. So it's up to him to maintain that fence and make sure all the gates are closed and up to spec for 15 years. It's a 15-year contract. So if he fails on that 15-year contract, then he would be held liable for the DNR portion potentially. Yep.
Yeah, it's quite a fence.
Yeah. Yep.
Electric control gates where you go into the.
Yep. Yeah. They can do a lot of nice stuff. It's all woven wire, 8 foot high,
Yeah.
big treated posts. Yep.
For comments or questions? Right, then we'll vote on the approval of the crop prices. All in favor, say aye.
I
Opposed? Then let's move on to the deer donation agreement, which is the next item on the budget, our next on the agenda.
So, yeah, we started discussing a little bit, but Gearing's opted out this year. They didn't want to do it. It's getting to be a lot just with CWD stuff, and what the DNR was willing to pay wasn't, worth it to them. So we're actually seeing a few places back out of the deer donation program, and it's recognized by the DNR. They're looking to up the amount they're willing to pay and try to make it, more accommodating to meat markets that want to do it. So that's where it's at right now in Washington County, at least. There's one in Fond du Lac County. Lair's does it if, anybody wants to take a deer in. And there's also Leroy Meats takes them still in Dodge County. So there's 2 fairly nearby that do still take them. But as of right now, Washington County doesn't have any.
I think the meat markets are so swamped, but just the regular business, they don't.
Yep. Don't need
have
to.
time
Yep.
doing so much, yeah.
Right.
So my question I was gonna ask is, even though if somebody resides in Washington County, shoots a deer in Washington County, they could bring it to Lair's,
Yep.
and that payment of the deer donation is processed through Fond du Lac County.
That's right. Yep. So it would still be paid for through the DNR. It just goes through, that meat market. So whether it's Lair's at Campbell Sport or Leroy's or, where they take it, doesn't matter. It still comes out of the DNR funding. So.
Questions or comments? All in favor of accepting the agreement as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Don't-
Thank
You
you
have a
very
motion
much.
and second with that?
Pardon?
I don't think you had a motion and second. Actually, we kind of jumped into discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry. We did not have a motion second. I apologize. A motion and a second to approve. Mr. Berg. Chris Pollock, all right. Now we'll vote. Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you for clarifying. Thank you. Thank you both for your presentation.
And then I think you need some signatures from you.
I
guys
have the
before-
papers here.
Yeah.
I would want to move on to the 2050 Parks and Golf Fiscally Thriving Plan. Very extensive report. Need a motion and a second to approve this so we can move into discussion.
Move to approve.
Mr. Gallantz. Mr. Berg, thank you. As I read through this, I thought it would be very interesting to look back on this document 25 years to see how close we came to it.
Yeah. So I am really pleased to present this to you today. This has been something that we have been working on for a very long time and have really wanted to see some sort of an organization of this. And so I'm going to really do 2 things. I'm going to show you a little bit of the sausage that went into this so that you understand kind of the data that we are looking at in this analysis because it's a really complex analysis and we're building a tool for it. That said, I am happy to sit down with any of you and specifically go through what I'm going to show you because this isn't really in your plan. And it's in there, but it's not, you don't have which shelters, what year, which park, which, projects are in there or the full lists. So I'm going to show you that. And then I'm going to take a minute to kind of talk through what the recommendations coming out of this plan are, because there's a lot of public policy baked into this. But part of what I want the group to understand is that we do some of this anyway, every single day. And we haven't really ever affirmed that, oh yeah, that is the policy direction that we want to continue to go. Right. So some of this is, we're finally writing it down, right? So we're finally going to be talking to you about the cash balances and the thresholds that we think are appropriate versus just, Jamie and finance agreeing that we should hold $700,000 in cash or, whatever those numbers are. And so there's a lot of work that will follow this. And this is going to be kind of our playbook. We debated, timing, and part of it was, we want to move forward because we really need to start standing up and working on some of these next steps that I'm going to talk about. At the end of the plan, there are 2 summary spreadsheets. And those are really kind of the nuts and bolts of this plan. Gina, can you pull up the spreadsheet I sent you for them? So what you have in the back of this plan is what I'm going to call a summary spreadsheet. Okay, so it talks about the beginning cash balances, and I'm talking about the Parks Fund right now, which is page. Yep, this can be on Zoom. This is all public. So, and I'm going to kind of walk through one of the years for you. I'm going to walk through 2023. We have a cash balance projection. We then have what we're calling maintenance above our base budget, which we're calling our organization of maintenance things that wouldn't necessarily be a capital. So think paint, think refrigerators, picnic tables, furniture, new couches that are falling apart, all different kinds of things. And I'll kind of flash you those lists. And then capital, which is what we're talking about as our project investments. And I'll show you what's composed of how we're getting to those numbers.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
But so does finance dictate dollar amount for whether it's capitalizable or not?
Yes. Yes. And it falls into this depreciation offset, which for some reason, the one I'm looking at doesn't have. Ours does though. Yeah. So they dictate that in this particular spreadsheet and in the plan you're looking at, 22 and 23 is already an adopted budget. So those capital numbers, 40,000 and 174, and the maintenance number match the appropriated budget and the projects you've already approved via the CIP. So when we get to the 2024-2025 CIP and the 5-year plan, which is coming up, in theory, this will be our playbook where we're going to go and we're going to say, okay, now these specific projects still need approval, right? So this stuff will flow or get bumped or change year to year, depending on what's happening. But it could, because it's a lot of estimates that go out in terms of where all the needs are. And then you see the depreciation, which is a financial calculation, which accounts for the fact that as depreciation falls off of our enterprise books, we free up revenue and cash in our fund. So there's an accounting for our cash balance, essentially. There's an accounting mechanism there. And then you start to see some of these policy questions that we're recommending show up. The maintenance fee, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but that one is really key because as we went through some of the capital project lists, which I'm going to let you glance at, we felt strongly that the park entrance fee or any other revenue really should not pay for the roof on Cabin 8 or the roof on the Hall and Chapel should be supported by the venue operation there. We talked a little bit about that when we were setting rates for some of these business operations, that we weren't necessarily fully funding the future capital of those items. And so this concept is that certain capital projects are directly supported by the wedding rentals at the Homestead Hollow Barn. So therefore, the Homestead Hollow Barn roof, the Homestead Hollow Barn floor, the Homestead Hollow Barn bar, the Homestead Hollow Barn patio, the Homestead Hollow Barn windows, the Homestead Hollow Barn doors should all be funded, coming off of those rentals. Right? So that's the concept there. And it's actually broken out by project, which projects would need to be supported by their own revenue streams. And we'll talk I know that's confusing, but we'll talk about that. And then we kind of talk about other ways that we're going to start to earmark money within our operating budget to fund the capital and maintenance needs of the parks in the next two lines. And then you see a drop off and you see kind of this endowment fund concept show up, which is at this point a very high level concept, which just talks about, it's kind of this idea of, we have additional revenues and we want to talk project by project about where we might be able to apply those revenues in order that makes sense for the endowment advisory committee, but also help support some of the capital needs that the parks have that are already kind of showing up as we need to do these. And then you see a debt proceeds line, which is intended to start a very preliminary dialogue about cash flows and the concept that we believe, and we cut substantially out of this plan, $2.7 million worth projects from where we started. And I'll show you that 2.7 million of removed things. But we did not cut out the restrooms. So we felt that the restroom facilities in each of the parks, so these are Homestead Hollow, Ackerman's Grove, Glacier Hills, Yar, so if you've been to Yar Park, the bathrooms there, at some point, those will come end of life. And we have identified that those are something that we believe we should be funding. And so we're starting that preliminary discussion around the appropriateness of debt versus the cash flow and the operating in these enterprises. And so you see that show up. You are not approving debt in this plan. You also see it show up for the irrigation system at the golf course related to the cash flow. The actual assessment as we move forward and we get closer to those years of whether and of the affordability, that will be a future policy discussion. We've only just identified it as it's coming. Hey, by the way, the bathrooms are going to cost, right, in future dollars for $3.5 to $4 million at some point in time. And, we want to be prepared to make sure we're setting ourselves up for that conversation. And then you kind of see the annual change, and then you see this cash balance, which in itself is a policy question about how much of a cash balance is appropriate for the Parks Enterprise and the Golf Enterprise Fund versus other items. Gina, can you toggle the spreadsheet on the screen? So what Gina has up there is the spreadsheet that's feeding that summary chart. And if you look at the screen for just a second, I know you can't read it, but can you toggle all the way to the last worksheet that says revised data? So within this is removed projects, project by year, capital projects, maintenance projects, everything feeding those numbers is in these spreadsheets. And again, I'm happy to, anyone who's interested in these and wants to dive in, we can share that. But the revised data tab at the very end, and then if you make sure you're at the top of the worksheet, will you, if you go all the way up? Okay. And then this is kind of, so you've got park area. The funding source column was something we added later related to the appropriateness of general revenues funding it, if that makes sense. Then we have an item grouping that we're using because we're sorting and filtering these in all different ways. And then we kind of have this note about what are things we want to make sure we bring forward for discussion that, and you'll see I don't know if you can kind of see the playground equipment at Glacier Hills policy questions of, when we start making decisions about cutting certain things or removing certain things, the chapel, it was labeled policy. A lot of the things labeled policy in this filter showed up in your plan under the project section, because we really felt like we wanted to point out that we're cutting, we're making a recommendation to do something with this that the county board or the committee might disagree with or might have a different, thought on. So we tried to identify those things that we thought were a little bit more controversial for the park user. Yes.
Condition 1, 2, 3. Is one good or bad? Scale of 1 to 3.
Can you start to scroll over a little bit then, Gina? And at least you might have to move the whole thing because you start to get into
Well, there are comments beyond that.
item. Yeah, just kind of go really slow. Item, condition. Then there's, keep going, other notes, quantity, rate, current cost estimate, years out, future cost estimate, group calculations, estimated replacement years, comments, right? So you start to see like light repairs to be completed by facilities. The new playground equipment needs to be purchased and installed. And then if you go useful life, 20 years, started depreciation, ended depreciation, 20, and then the years. And then if you just toggle down for a second, Gina, slowly just scroll. I just want to kind of show you, we can filter by park, we can filter by restrooms, we can filter by, you can go a little faster. I just want to show them the size and magnitude of how much data is actually within these spreadsheets that is feeding, appliances, paint. This literally has every possible maintenance item that we could think of. Bridges on the Eisenbahn, decking, flooring, included within this analysis on a rotating schedule that we can adjust and manage year to year. If you peruse this, and I hope some of you take that opportunity to really look at this, you probably will find something. Because there is a lot of data here and we are, there's human work that went into this. So whether it's a disagreement with, hey, maybe this should be $5,000 higher, or, this rate went up 20%, and we adjusted all the current year costs recently because costs were increasing so much, and used a 2% inflation based on averages. So there's a lot of assumptions in here that really generate that summary list.
Amy,
Yes.
should we assume that this is going to be a live document, so to speak, that is something does or does not happen in this fiscal year, it gets moved down the line and everything adjusts?
It's going to be an annual update, very similar to the 2050 highway plan. One of the next steps is actually building this into more of an online tool versus a spreadsheet. We didn't do that initially because of the time and because we kept changing what we needed and how the analysis was going to work. But that is one of the short-term recommended actions, because IT is going to build this out so you can toggle filters and you can look at different projects and what this looks like. So we did this for parks and we did it for golf because their funding streams are commingled and the endowment revenues are commingled. The golf course's spreadsheets, they did not make any cuts. So we put together a 2050 plan for them, and they are in theory funding everything that they could possibly think that they wanted. We know that might not be the case. So it's almost a worst case scenario for them. And you see one of the recommendations early on to hire the consultant on the irrigation project, which is showing up in about 8 to 12 years. Again, the best guess was made on the timing of that system, but that system won't be replaced until it needs to be replaced. So there's some work we're going to do to try to make that more accurate. as we do planning. But all of that data really, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Gulf plan, because it's really, it was really developed both because we wanted to have that long-term outlook, but also to show that we could continue to use $120,000 to support the parks enterprise and to demonstrate going into the endowment discussions that their capital needs can be fully funded absent intervention from additional revenue. If at any point in time that would change and they would need money, we also looked at, we played the scenarios out. So those margins, you know, our average is that once every 4 years, we get bad weather. So our margin, that 220,000 margin-ish is made in October, November, and April. So the years we aren't hitting that, we literally probably closed the course October 5th or October 7th. We've had snow. If you remember the Halloween where we had snow and we lost November, losing November loses $100,000 of that margin, right? So if we can back out that about once every 4 to 5 years and still maintain a healthy plan for the golf course. So we did do some preliminary looking at what those margins should be, how frequently, and used an average. Their margin fluctuates higher and lower than what shows in that plan. But that was a kind of a crack at, well, you know, if you're going to assume it every single year, you, at least to show the plan, then you need to make it lower enough that you account for the 25% of the time when they just won't hit those numbers. So we tried to do that, but so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about golf because I think it's other than the second short-term recommendation, but it's good. So I'm going to pause right there, and then I'm going to actually walk through the recommendations that show up in this plan. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yes.
On the first spreadsheet, you talk about target discussed projects eligible for endowment funding. That doesn't start till 2026. There are reasons, since the endowment's already in place, do we like give it a couple years to grow before we start drawing? Is that the idea?
That was the original discussion with the endowment. The endowment also lost money, $200,000 this year. The endowment committee I'm talking to them on Friday. We are working on standing that up this year. In one of these recommendations to start kind of talking about what that's going to look like and how that's going to work. The 75,000 average per year, that could be one project 1 year. That's $500,000, right? That we hold money for, or how that looks. That amount is about the amount that's in the county's fund. It does not account for anything in the private fund. So again, it's a very conservative concept that allowed us not to cut as deep into what the capital recommendations are. So if the endowment committee doesn't like any of our projects that we're kind of trying to talk through, we would just, there is more cuts that we can make to this plan. And that gets into the year by year of, you know, do you really want to do this? What does the cash balance look like? And again, so it's just to sort of outline that concept that that's the year where we want to start, we may need to, based on our capital funding, start having a conversation about how that can support some of the investments that the parks want to do. There's a goal about added amenities as well. And, you know, they may not like some, you know, that half of the advisory committee may not like that we cut the chapel out, or that we cut the 3 playgrounds out, or that we cut the, you know, whatever we cut out. And so I think each one of those in theory has the potential to generate, you know, a discussion about, well, there's currently not funding identified for that project, would be my response. You know, this is an active plan. It changes every year. However, we have currently not identified any projects for the asphalt replacement of the upper lot at Yar Park. right? That is currently not something we are planning to do. So the short-term recommended actions, I talked a little bit about the parks maintenance fee for shelter rentals, cabin rentals, and house rentals. The venues, the cabins and the houses. Earlier in the plan, you kind of see those revenue splits in terms of how they're funding the operation. So this is added money. This is something that we are showing in the plan for 2023 that starts to fund some of these, I'm going to call them need to be done quicker things. And so that's actually one of the reasons why like this item is going to follow very quickly on depending what happens with this plan. The second bullet, execute management strategies to maintain the margins shown in the plan. This is actually not a small policy decision. This can be painful. So I can tell you, we got quotes for our carts at the Washington County Golf Course that went up over 100%. So our annual lease right now is 40,000. We're looking at 80 to 100,000 when that lease lapses. There's only one way to make up that type of revenue. If you're maintaining the annual margin, and it's to increase the cart rates. So I am just starting to talk this language. We've been doing this. This has been something the golf course has been doing for the past 3-4 years. But it's bad right now. The economy is bad. Things are costing a lot more. Doing this next year is probably going to be a little bit more painful. And this applies to everything. Cost of alcohol is going up. The cost of food is going up. The cost of, and so this is kind of that, subsidy question of public play, and the park user fee applying too, right? If we're covering our costs of wages and health insurance and our operating costs, that can have painful political consequences, right? So we're not necessarily asking you to make a decision on that today, but that's the increase to the park sticker, right? That's the increase to we haven't increased that since we implemented it in 2018. So those are future discussions that we're going to be bringing forward. We bring forward rate increases every year, so that's not new, but yes.
So to your point, there's comments in here, I can't find exactly, but about potential new amenities, eliminating amenities. And so when you just talked about the potential challenges with continuing to fund that off the levy, how much thought analysis has gone in today to understand those high ROI amenities, so the margins you spoke to, and focus on that versus those maybe higher cost items that have low return on investment? For example, a park or a playground equipment, uber expensive. Is there much use in it? Do we have utilization that determine, or is it just going to be a few public outcries say, oh, you're getting rid of a swing at a park, how dare you? Well, you know what, it sits empty 75% of the days of the year.
Yeah.
Or 100% of the days of the year. That's the story that we have to be able to tell. And
right.
As policymakers, we have to be able to make that hard decision. Do you spend $200,000 on a slide that's used, not used?
Yeah. And so that comment is very consistent with the, I think, general sentiment of conservative thought. And
Conservative, I would just
or
call it
prudent, financially sound, and also not scared of what those decisions are. And so there was dialogue about a lot of these recommendations, and playgrounds is one that I have small children, so we don't need those things. They're not entering our ROI. And then you've got this over here of, okay, well, we can tell you management wise, we just did a survey of our park users, and it's one of the things we hear the most frequently. So we took a lot of qualitative data and thoughts around, so the 3 recommended playgrounds that show up as replaced, one in as early as 2026, is Glacier Hills, which has our cabin campground and our kind of wedding venues there where they stroll over there. Yar Beach, which is heavily used in the summer by children. And, we continually want to make sure that that beach and those revenue streams have top amenities. And Homestead Hollow, which houses Kids Club, does does a rental there for their summer kids camp of about $5,000 a year. And they have the soccer fields, and it's also more centrally located to the village of Germantown, with the dog park. And so the population is a little bit higher. The ones that we were like, no ROI here, right? We've got Heritage Trails going away, Sandy Knoll, not a huge kid zone, for lack of a better way to say it. And Ackerman's Grove, which is probably the one with the tap yard now, that we also did a lot of thought about which of these things are we unfunding that potentially have other ways to fund. And so we did some removal of things, and you see this in the dog park fencing, right? Where we had conversations about, well, maybe we need to increase the advertising targets on these fences, or the maintenance users. We have 10 years to figure out, how to fund these things, that we don't need to draw into these general revenues for those items. And we took out a significant amount of the shelters. We took out almost everything at Heritage Trails. So there's nothing in here related to mountain bikes. So I think we did try to do that, to the extent that an individual analysis was done on each item in here. I mean, that didn't happen. Like with numbers, right? But we do have park data holistically. And we have our user revenue report broken out by park, and the growth we've been tracking. And we have memos written on the impact of the tap yard, the impact of the mountain bikes, the impact of we just did it for the Homestead Hollow pipeline. We are analyzing how much revenue loss we're going to have in a year by shutting this park down. It's $120,000 at Homestead Hollow, right? So we do have a lot of that anecdotally, that was informing some of those thoughts. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, does it also include, for example, all of the rented units? Do we gain feedback from those folks, especially, the chapel and other areas where we know there's some high capital expenses that are coming down the line? Are they saying, yeah, these are great amenities? No, they're not. I'm not going to come back because, we don't do this one or the other. So, is that factored in?
Yeah, so the chapel was looked at but part of what's happening with the chapel. Yep.
We also go into the city sessions. Is there feedback there to your point about, politically, if you get rid of a playground at a park, wait a minute, then it's not a park anymore if there's not a playground. So I just.
Right. And I think the message that I would like to send, and this is, I think, why we're interested in this, and I'm going to use the chapel as an example, or the playground at Ackerman's Grove, right? It's currently unfunded. So not that we don't want it. The historic chapel, I mean, there's a ton of history behind that, right? So it's very likely that is going to generate a community conversation around, I don't know, we have not went out and talked to Holy Hill, right? That chapel used to sit on Holy Hill. Or the Richfield Historical Society. Can we move it? Or the West Bend, Washington County Historical Society. At some point in time, by saying that this is currently unfunded, a conversation is going to swarm that item, we believe, that then results in, okay, what should really be done with this? But in terms of the user analysis, it's used as a backup indoor wedding reception or wedding ceremony location, which could also be done in the upper part of the facility. And our percentages show that you go to Glacier, a lot of our ceremonies at Glacier Hills are held down in the pines or up above. They're going there for outdoor ceremonies. So we don't think that it's going to really impact the ceremony rentals, because almost all the brides, doesn't matter, right? We're going outside. If there's a rain, we're going to wait 30 minutes. If if it's snowing, that's what we want. The chapel is nice and there is a handful of weddings that and church services held there in the winter. But again, we don't make money in the winter. We have to pay extra snow removal costs. Like so we have done some of that in terms of, why that's recommended the way it is. I think that there's been some desire to kind of put it out there in hopes that, that way, we can say to places like the Tap Yard who are building their business there and rely on that playground. Well, we have this unfunded. So is this something you want to partner on? Or is this something that we should be looking at? Or if we get that type of backlash from the community or the Lake District or whoever, that's, we still have the endowment discussions. We still have the plan gets revised every year. But to make the numbers work, some stuff had to go. But there is nothing new in this plan. I just want to be crystal clear. Like it is all existing infrastructure.
Questions or comments?
Um,
I was a little surprised if you look at the revenue mix, 33% of the income comes from chapel and barn rentals.
that is the 3 venues. So it is the Glacier Hills Hall, the barn at Homestead Hollow, and the barn at Sandy Knoll. And that's why you see that maintenance fee stood up on the Capitol, because it's a question of who should be paying for those facility improvements.
Let's call it, who's gonna subsidize what, right? Because that's the reality is, does the entrance fee subsidize the entire system? Or do those who use the wedding chapels, do they quote unquote pay for the future maintenance and capitalized expenses? I struggle a little bit with some of that. I'm just not sure where I rest. I don't have a problem with paying a license every year. It doesn't matter what price it is, because that's something I enjoy doing, or going to the park. But if I'm paying for a chapel that I'll never ever use again, and that's part of my park fee, I'm like, wait a minute, why am I subsidizing something I'm not using? And it's, bringing revenue for somebody else in their enjoyment. So I struggle with that. Where from a policy standpoint and a park sustainability does one thing subsidize another? Go to the cabins, for example. Hey, if the users of the cabin, are paying for future cost maintenance and repair, is that reasonable? Probably, right? That's operating expense. Where I struggle is, do you break that out line by line? I hate that personally. If it's a part of the expense, all right, it's part of the expense. But if we want transparency, to constituents that, look, users of the tiny cabins are actually paying for the future replacement of it. Okay, but again, what's a sustainable price point? If you're $120 for a tiny cabin, you're probably not going to get 70% occupancy.
Right. Yeah. And the tiny cabins don't have a ton of maintenance. The cabins are pretty, their maintenance costs are relatively small. They have high returns on investment because they book nightly, and then, we just put steel roofs on. That's what the $40,000 is. So they don't have a lot in here. Like if we pull up, and we did this exercise, we pulled up the cabins. What do the future costs for the cabins look like? That is the kind of the next discussion about the maintenance fee. How does it apply to what? How much is it on each? How are the rates then sustained? And then you also see us earmarking some of the rate increase revenue, whereas in the past, we've taken that revenue and we've just put it in our operating fund for wages. Well, or health insurance, or to get more sustainable. Well, we've reached that operational sustainability. And so now we're saying that part of that rate increase that you already approved for those venues, we are actually sort of, I'm going to use the term earmarking, or putting it in a project fund, kind of saying like, this is for the current and future capital needs of this facility, versus, just eating that up with, adding additional staff or any other increase we might see in the enterprise. So we're kind of trying to separate that. We need to make funding our existing infrastructure a priority before we can start adding new amenities or building new things, or, kind of going hog wire on what we're gonna do with the good year we had with the tap yard.
Sorry if I'm hogging this, but I do have another question on some of the unfunded pieces. So I'm assuming you've explored, so I'll ask the question, private, public, contribution, donation, and drives, corporate sponsorship. I was just thinking of the Ice Bond Trail, the mile markers, you have a QR code and, ABC company in West Bend, give 5% discount by joining here and they pay us, whatever, $100 a year to have that up. Have we explored that type of revenue stream for some of the unfunded pieces or just, regular funding?
So again, this plan is nothing new, right? So I think what we are attempting to do with this plan is to identify, right? And we're kind of at that point of we've identified what's funded that we think, we're going to work to do this. I don't need corporate money for that. We do have the endowment. So that piece of that is, I think that was part of the intent of some of those donations that went into that endowment of, use this for new signage on the Eisenbahn, use this for trail markers, use this for the educational nature kiosk that accompanies your new, and I keep using this example of I've got a playground replacement in here for $73,000. But does it include ADA swings and, new, is it still mulch? Does it have the new fancy carpet? No, it doesn't. Right. So those are the types of things where I think you're going to start to see the community conversation and the endowment piece come into play of, well, we're planning to do this. This is how much money we have allocated. Now, do we want more than that? I think that that's kind of your year by year setting goals and talking through. We didn't even know we had the Glacier Hills playground coming up until we put this plan together. Right. So now we can say, all right, we'd like to do this in 2026. We're planning for this much, which is a number this contractor gave us. Who's going to manage this project and what does that look like for this community? Right? Because maybe it is going to grow from there based on opportunities that you might be able to find. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's part of the, you see that happening and we only have so many man hours that, went into analysis and we haven't done any recruitment of the corporate other than the endowment, which is now at, sitting at $3 million whose annual distributions we're looking at applying to things just like that.
Well, that's making some assumptions, right? Interest return. We're going into global recession.
Right. No, I know. I'm aware.
How does that impact utilization when we have off years or even the inflation projection? I know you have to use something, but how do we account for those fluctuations, right? I don't think inflation's going down next year, the year before to that 2 or 3% that we're targeting. That can significantly impact the balance sheet, right?
Yeah.
How do we account for those off years, the rain off year you mentioned every 4 years, those type of things? So that could really sink in one year versus another. Right.
And the cash balance. So we ran some scenarios with these cash balances, right? If you look at the summary spreadsheet, in not to get too far into this future conversation, but how much is appropriate to hold, right? And so the goal that I had was we want to make sure we're holding enough cash that we don't need someone else to bail us out, right? So we know our operating budget's $1 million a year. So if something happens to one of our revenue streams, which you've seen them, right? The golf course revenue stream, the venue rentals, the rates, the occupancy in our chapel dips to 50%. I mean, don't get me wrong. We manage those numbers every single month, right? We are on where are our revenue streams at and what adjustments do we need to make? But if we have something traumatic happen, what level do we want to see there? And what where are we really trying to stay at? Because that gets at your point about, well, yeah, I get that, Jamie, but you're showing $266,000 of capital in 2024. And I'm actually gonna see what that is. Hold on. Let's see here.
Well, you're pulling it up. So did we set a
Huh?
target cash balance, not unlike the board? I set a target, fund balance as a percent of the total budget.
Say that one more time.
Does your, sorry, the cash balance target, did we set a policy for that? As a percent of the operating budget?
So Margie, there was some discussion about, we do have some policies on fund balance. We have opted for a variety of reasons that we need to work with cash, not fund. Because so the parks has a lot of assets in our fund related to land and building structures, and it really muddies up how, the financials are fairly government math. And so while that was one of the key decision points that the group made in the development of this plan for golf as well, which was we're going to use cash. We want to know at the end of the day how much cash we have available. Forget, fund balance, and think of this. I mean, I'm not that I want to bring up the Samaritan, right? But you can have a healthy fund balance, but be cash poor. And we don't want to be cash poor. So we are using cash, which means that, to your question, we have identified that both for the golf course has a cash balance policy right now based on cash flow for their operation, not on a healthy level to fund capital and fund their operation. The county's cash balance policies are based on cash flow and how much they should invest. And so we've identified that needs to be a discussion. We need to have some general agreement on what's happening with the cash balances. The cash balances you see here, those average amounts that are showing up, were my comfort level with the cash balance, which could be way off from where we really want to be. Because at the end of the day, it's, if we run out of cash, we're just going to, come knocking and say, hey, county, what do you want to do here? Like, right. So future policymakers would be on the hook for any of those catastrophic things. And so, how much cash do we want to tie up? Do we want to be transferring more to the endowment? What are those types of conversations? We were originally going to do that before we brought forward the plan so that we knew how to build the plan. And then opted to add that as a next step of, okay, here's what this plan shows up. Because if we came back and now we know, right, if we set a cash balance that's a couple $100,000 higher, I'm going to cut a couple $100,000 more projects, but it's going to hurt. Right. So in 2024, to give you an idea, I don't know why this is so low. Oh, in 2025, right, there's $410,000 of access road asphalt. So in the asphalt was a huge cost that we haven't been maintaining in the parks. And there's a chart that demonstrates that. And this was kind of one of those split the babies as well, of the access roads for plowing reasons and entrance reasons. We really feel strongly need to be asphalt. So if you're going to do that, then you need to pay for that. And we haven't been paying for any of that. So, but then, there was a substantial amount of lots that we're converting to gravel. That's going to be painful. The park users are not going to like that. And that's why it's called out in that project policy area, because if we actually start plowing some of these lots when their time is up, because we're going to wait until, they're like, we're making an intentional decision not to maintain them.
Comments, questions? Recommendations we make today will then go to the full board for consideration. Have a motion and second. Vote on adopting the 2050 Parks and Golf fiscally driving plan. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Plan is accepted. Our next meeting date is Thursday, November 17th at 7:30 a.m. Adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Huh? See the spreadsheets.
No.
I'm happy to share.
Not necessarily.
I missed that first year I was. Oh, that's. Right? You guys got to enjoy all that.
Oh, I apologize.
I didn't see that.
Well, that was where we first started.
It's fun.